Millionaire let Mistress move in with him. His pregnant wife took the house in court. They say a single choice can alter the course of a lifetime. And for Richard Davis, that choice was letting another woman into his home, while his pregnant wife slept in the next room, unaware of the betrayal unfolding before her eyes. A wealthy entrepreneur with a seemingly perfect marriage, Richard risked everything for a spark of forbidden passion. Little did he know his decision would unleash a chain reaction of secrets lawsuits and heartbreak powerful enough to shatter his once untouchable world in this explosive tale of trust and treachery. Discover how a man's desire for more can unravel his life in ways he never imagined. Richard Davis's journey from humble roots to millionaire status seemed like a modern-day rags to riches fairy tale. Raised by a single mother in a modest Chicago apartment, Richard spent countless afternoons dreaming of success. He pored over business magazines in the local library, believing that one day he too could stand among the elite. After graduating college with a degree in finance, he worked tirelessly, moving from one investment firm to another, determined to learn every angle of the industry. Eventually, he struck gold when he launched a private equity startup focused on real estate ventures. Nicknamed the Davis Fund, it blossomed rapidly, turning him into a local success story. With hard-earned wealth came new opportunities and experiences, lavish parties, invitations to exclusive clubs, and introductions to social circles he never knew existed. It was at one such high-profile fundraiser where he first encountered Emily Rogers, a spirited woman from a well-to-do family. Emily's father, Robert Thompson, was a respected lawyer in Chicago, a man whose name carried weight in both the courtroom and the city's elite circles. Emily, however, was uninterested in the snobbery of her peers. She gravitated toward authenticity. So when she met Richard, who had worked his way to prominence without the benefit of a silver spoon, sparks flew. Their courtship was swift but sincere. They bonded over shared ambition and a mutual desire to do good in the world, despite their wealth. Within a year, they were married in a grand ceremony by Lake Michigan, surrounded by friends and family. In many ways, they appeared the quintessential power couple. She was charming, philanthropic, and supportive. He was driven, charismatic, and innovative. Together they seemed unstoppable. Emily became pregnant just a few months into their marriage. Although Richard often worried about his responsibilities, both as a husband and a soon-to-be father, Emily was radiant with joy and confidence. She believed that motherhood would be yet another chapter in their flourishing life. Friends congratulated them, business partners toasted their success, and Richard and Emily dazzled everyone with their unwavering devotion to each other. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. Richard spent more time at the office navigating complex acquisitions and forging new partnerships. He often returned home in the early morning hours, citing phone calls with international clients or urgent board meetings in different time zones. Emily tried to be understanding, but pregnancy hormones and her own insecurities about their relationship made her anxious. She confided in her father, Robert Thompson, sharing her worries that Richard was pushing himself too hard, or that the stress might affect his excitement about fatherhood. Robert, ever the protective father, advised her to keep a close eye on Richard's well-being and to maintain open communication. Emily attempted just that, greeting him at the door with a warm meal, leaving him sweet notes in his briefcase, and arranging small weekend getaways. Yet despite her best efforts, Richard's mind seemed elsewhere, and his business phone never stopped buzzing. He was drifting into a world of ambition and temptation, far from the devoted man Emily once knew. As the weeks passed, their once harmonious routine morphed into polite awkwardness. Emily's belly was growing a physical reminder of their shared responsibility, while Richard's distance was equally palpable. He avoided conversations about baby names and nursery designs lost in spreadsheets and stock projections. Little did Emily know her intuition about Richard's distractions was not without basis. In the coming weeks, her world would turn upside down when she discovered the unthinkable, that the very man who once pledged undying devotion was now treading on dangerous ground, embracing new thrills in the arms of someone else. The seeds of Richard's betrayal were sown months before Emily even suspected. A socialite named Alicia Morgan had appeared at one of the Davis Fund's investor galas. Alicia was known for her striking beauty and her laser-focused determination to secure a wealthy husband or partner, with a reputation for capturing the attention of powerful men. She sensed opportunity the moment she laid eyes on Richard. She listened intently to Richard's keynote speech that evening, impressed by his poise knowledge and the quiet confidence that made him more interesting than the usual pack of boastful egotists. After the event, Alicia maneuvered her way through the crowded ballroom to approach him. She complimented his presentation, feigning deep interest in his philosophies on real estate and investment strategies. Flattered Richard offered Alicia a business card, suggesting they continue discussing opportunities for collaboration. In the following weeks, Alicia reached out under the guise of seeking advice for her fledgling boutique business. Though Richard initially agreed out of politeness and a desire to expand his network, he found himself strangely intrigued by her. Alicia was witty, seductive, and seemed genuinely fascinated by his work. Their meetings shifted from formal conference rooms to cozy bistros where their conversations drifted from business strategies to personal stories. Alicia laughed at all his jokes, praised his accomplishments, and made him feel like a king. Richard tried to justify their growing closeness, convincing himself he was merely forming a business alliance. Deep down, however, he knew something darker was at play. There was a chemistry between them, a burning desire that both excited and scared him. He found himself lying to Emily about late-night client dinners, not always because there was an actual client to entertain, but because he wanted more time with Alicia. At first, it was just texting, playful banter, and occasional flirtation. Then came the phone calls lasting well into the night. Next were the stolen kisses in the back seat of her chauffeured car, the clandestine hotel rendezvous under the guise of an urgent board meeting. With each secret meeting, the guilt that gnawed at him grew, yet so did his lust for Alicia's intoxicating presence. Emily, meanwhile, sensed something was off. She noticed Richard's sudden bursts of giddiness, followed by periods of distant brooding. He was more protective of his phone, dismissing her with a quick kiss or a wave when he rushed out the door. When she asked him about his day, he gave her non-committal answers, as if his mind was elsewhere. Though not one to jump to conclusions, she confronted him about his schedule, only to be met with an irritated response that he was building a future for them, and needed her support. Amid these warning signs, Emily chose to trust him. Their marriage vows echoed in her mind, and she wanted desperately to believe in their bond, especially with a baby on the way. But doubt is a tenacious weed, taking root in the smallest cracks of trust. If Richard was drifting away, Emily wondered how far would he go. Alicia, on the other hand, viewed Emily as merely an obstacle. While she feigned innocence, publicly referring to Emily as your lovely wife in her conversations with Richard privately, she relished the thought of winning him over completely. The notion of him being a soon-to-be father only intensified her thrill. She believed that if she could capture his heart at a time when he was most vulnerable, she would earn a permanent place in his life and fortune. The stage was set for the ultimate betrayal. Friends and family began noticing subtle changes in Richard's demeanor. Some chalked it up to stress from running a successful enterprise. Others whispered about the possibility of an affair. No one knew for certain how deep the chasm was becoming in the Davis household. Oblivious to these undercurrents, Emily continued preparing for the baby's arrival, setting up a serene nursery and dreaming of a harmonious family life. She held on to the hope that once the baby was born, Richard would realize what truly mattered. Little did she know events were already in motion that would threaten to tear apart everything she held dear. The turning point arrived on a chilly autumn evening when Richard received a frantic call from Alicia. She was in tears, claiming her landlord had abruptly evicted her, leaving her homeless with nowhere to go. Whether her story was entirely true or cleverly concocted, Richard couldn't be sure, but the desperation in her voice tugged at him. He felt he had to act. In his mind, Richard rationalized his next move. Alicia was, after all, someone he cared about, someone he had grown intimately close to. The idea of her wandering the streets or suffering in some shoddy motel didn't sit well with him. At the same time, he was well aware that offering Alicia refuge in his home would be catastrophic for his marriage. Yet desire, arrogance, and a twisted sense of responsibility overshadowed his better judgment. So he did the unthinkable. Under the pretense of a late-night business emergency, Richard drove to the curb outside Alicia's apartment, packed her suitcases into his Range Rover, and brought her to the lavish home he shared with his pregnant wife. Emily, already asleep upstairs, had no clue of the guest who crept silently into the guest room. That night, Richard assured Alicia that this arrangement was temporary, just until she could find a new place. Alicia played her part perfectly, feigning reluctance and worry about being a burden. Secretly, she delighted in the brazen move. It was a victory that shattered the final boundary separating her from Richard's world. In the days that followed, the tension inside the house became suffocating. While Emily bustled around with prenatal appointments, baby shower preparations, and decorating the nursery, Alicia lurked behind closed doors, emerging only when Emily was out of sight. Richard found himself juggling two realities under one roof: the doting husband trying to keep up appearances with his visibly pregnant wife, and the attentive lover meeting Alicia's every need behind Emily's back. Despite his efforts at secrecy, it wasn't long before Emily noticed subtle inconsistencies: an unfamiliar perfume lingering in the hallway, 2 wine glasses left in the sink, and footsteps in the guest room that Richard claimed was under renovation. Confusion gave way to suspicion, but Emily tried to stave off paranoia. She told herself her hormones were playing tricks on her. Perhaps the wine glasses were from a business associate who had dropped by. Perhaps the footsteps were from a cleaning crew or a decorator Richard had hired. But some truths simply can't be hidden. One morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual, feeling nauseous. Stumbling down to the kitchen for crackers and ginger ale, she nearly dropped the glass in her hand when she saw Alicia, in nothing but a silk robe, rummaging through the fridge. Their eyes locked, time seemed to freeze. Emily's first instinct was to think Alicia was a friend or relative who had arrived unexpectedly. But the moment Alicia backed away, stammering an apology, a cold realization gripped Emily. The way Alicia tried to cover herself, the way she avoided eye contact, it all screamed guilt. Emily tried to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat, strangled by a mix of shock and betrayal. Alicia left the kitchen in a hurry, leaving Emily to grapple with the horrifying scenario that her home was sheltering the very woman who might be tearing her marriage apart. When Richard entered the kitchen moments later, still adjusting his tie for the office, he found Emily pale and trembling. He began to concoct a quick excuse. Perhaps Alicia was just a friend in need. But Emily's eyes were full of accusations, With tears streaming down her face, she demanded the truth. Richard stammered, trying to dodge the obvious, but his attempts at damage control rang hollow. They argued for hours. Emily's heartbreak poured out in agonized sobs, her hands protectively over her pregnant belly. She demanded Alicia's immediate departure. Richard, cornered, tried to plead for calm, insisting that Alicia had nowhere else to go, that it was only temporary, that she was just a friend who needed help. But Emily's fury knew no bounds. Her sense of betrayal was as immense as the life growing inside her. Eventually, Alicia left the house under a hail of insults, taking refuge in a nearby hotel room Richard paid for. Emily refused to look at. Richard threatened that she would leave, threatened to call her father and hire the fiercest lawyers in Chicago. For his part, Richard was left scrambling between attempting to console his wife and pacify Alicia, who was livid at having been thrown out so unceremoniously. In that moment, the illusions of control Richard clung to began to evaporate. The facade of a perfect marriage, of being a respectable businessman who had it all cracked under the pressure of his own reckless choices. While he tried to minimize the damage, little did he know, a legal tsunami was brewing, one that would not only upend his marriage, but also strip him of the very home he had so arrogantly claimed for himself and his mistress Emily, spent several sleepless nights replaying the moment she found Alicia in her kitchen. The betrayal felt surreal, as if she were stuck in a twisted nightmare from which she couldn't wake. The emotional toll on her was crushing. Her appetite waned, her energy dipped, and her prenatal checkups reflected elevated stress. Concerned for both her daughter and soon-to-be grandchild, Robert Thompson stepped in, urging Emily to confide in him. Reluctantly, Emily revealed everything: the suspicious late nights, the strange presence in their home, and the final explosive showdown in the kitchen. Her father, known for his fierce loyalty and steely courtroom demeanor, listened quietly, his gaze darkening with each sentence. He consoled Emily as best he could, but made it clear that if she wanted protection, financially, emotionally, and legally, he would do whatever it took. Still in love with the life she had built with Richard, Emily wasn't sure if she wanted an immediate divorce. Despite the humiliation, she harbored a fragile hope that Richard might realize the severity of his actions and change. But her father, recalling countless cases where betrayed spouses were left destitute, insisted she secure her rights. With Robert's guidance, Emily gathered bank statements, property deeds, and any relevant financial documents she could find. She was stunned by the sheer number of assets under Richard's name, investments in real estate stocks in rising tech companies, and multiple overseas accounts. She also noticed a curious paper trail of hotel receipts, luxury gifts, and questionable business expenses, which seemed to correlate suspiciously with Alicia Morgan's entry into their lives. Emily's anger flared anew. Even as his wife carried their child, Richard had been wining and dining another woman, using the very funds that were meant to build a future for their new family. The betrayal extended far beyond infidelity. It was a calculated deception, using their marital assets to bankroll his affair. Despite her heartbreak, Emily steeled herself. She might have been naive before, but she wouldn't allow her child's future to be jeopardized. She told Richard she had consulted a lawyer, her father no less, and warned that any further disrespect or dishonesty would drive her to legal action. Richard rattled, tried to make amends, swearing it had all been a horrible mistake, that Alicia meant nothing, and that he would never again breach their trust. He even suggested going to therapy, hoping to patch the wounds he had caused. Yet his assurances rang hollow. Emily sensed his continued unease, as if he were juggling an internal conflict over whether he should remain with her out of obligation or return to Alicia out of desire. His attempts at closeness felt forced, and she caught him hesitating to unlock his phone whenever she was nearby. Though Emily wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, her instincts screamed that the worst was not behind them. Meanwhile, Alicia seethed from her hotel suite. She bombarded Richard with text messages, some laced with apologies, others dripping with accusations. She swore she had nowhere to go, that she needed him. She threatened to expose their affair to the tabloids if he dared abandon her completely. Richard tried to keep her quiet, paying for her accommodations while he worked through the turbulence at home. But Alicia was losing patience, and the precarious arrangement was close to collapsing in spectacular fashion. In the midst of this chaos, the company Richard had built from scratch also began showing signs of strain. Employees whispered about their boss's unusual distractedness and uncharacteristic mistakes. Several key clients threatened to pull out after an important deal fell through. Gossip trickled through the office grapevine. The boss was embroiled in some personal scandal, and his meltdown was threatening the Davis Fund's stability. No matter how desperately Richard tried to compartmentalize his life, repairing things with Emily, appeasing Alicia, and steering his company, the walls were closing in. Every day he awoke with a pit in his stomach, uncertain which bomb would explode next. Emily watched this unfolding disaster with an odd mix of sorrow and grim resolve. She had hoped that her husband would choose to do the right thing for her and their unborn child, but each day that passed without a real show of remorse or accountability chipped away at her already damaged trust. She saw him scrambling to keep his secrets hidden, to maintain an illusion of control, yet he was failing at every turn. Torn between her love for the man she married and her fury at the man he'd become, Emily wrestled with a difficult decision. Should she continue to fight for her marriage, risking more heartbreak, or should she prepare for the legal battle of her life, one that, if successful, might grant her the victory no betrayed spouse ever wants to seek, but sometimes must? It all came to a head one evening when Emily found a set of incriminating text messages on Richard's phone. She had resisted snooping for months, believing that if she stooped to distrust their marriage was already over. But after yet another suspicious late-night call, her anxieties overwhelmed her. When Richard dozed off on the couch, phone in hand, she couldn't help herself. Scrolling through his messages, she discovered the horrifying truth in plain sight. Alicia had been blackmailing him, threatening to reveal their affair to the media if he didn't take care of her. There were references to hush-money checks, hotel reservations, even a renewed conversation about her moving in again this time, with a plan to gradually introduce her to Emily. Emily's heart shattered. Not only had he lied, but he was actively plotting to reintegrate Alicia into their home. She felt a mixture of revulsion and heartbreak, so potent it made her dizzy. She quietly placed the phone back, hoping Richard wouldn't wake. She needed to think. She needed to act. The next morning, while Richard was busy in his home office, Emily locked herself in the bedroom, tears streaming down her face. She dialed her father, Dad. She began, voice quivering. "It's worse than I thought," Robert Thompson listened calmly. Then, in that firm, unwavering tone he used in court, he told her it was time. Time to protect herself. Time to protect her unborn child. Time to go on the offensive. Though Emily's chest tightened at the thought of ending her marriage, she realized that the man she once adored had become someone unrecognizable. By evening, father and daughter were ready. Emily stood in the foyer, suitcase in hand, tears in her eyes, as Robert confronted Richard with a thick stack of papers. Richard glanced at Emily, confusion and panic flickering across his face. "What's going on?" he demanded. Robert gave a curt nod. "I'm here as Emily's legal representative." In a cold, methodical voice, He explained that Emily had grounds to file for divorce and intended to request exclusive possession of the marital home. He cited emotional distress, adultery, and misappropriation of marital assets. Richard's face paled at the word adultery. He tried to interject to plead his case, but Robert silenced him with a glare that had unsettled many opponents in the courtroom. "If you contest this," Robert warned, "we will bring Alicia Morgan and every single piece of evidence into court. You will be dragged through a very public trial." Richard looked desperately at Emily, hoping for some sign of leniency. But Emily's eyes were red, her lips pressed into a tight line. She had reached the limit of her tolerance. Richard stammered that he still loved her, that he would do whatever it took to make amends. Yet even then, he couldn't bring himself to admit the scope of his wrongdoing. Instead, he tried to minimize Alicia's role, claiming it was just a fling that got out of control, as if that would lessen the pain. Emily closed her eyes, recalling every night she went to bed alone, every shattered dream she had nurtured for their future child, every humiliating moment Alicia occupied her home. Then, with a trembling breath, she told him it was too late. "I gave you so many chances," she whispered. "You chose to keep lying." Robert, sensing Emily's distress, took her arm and gently ushered her out the door. Before leaving, he informed Richard that the papers would be filed the next morning. Richard would have the option to settle amicably, but any attempt to fight would open the gates to a legal war he was bound to lose. The door closed, and Richard felt a hollowness spread through his chest. The reality that he might lose everything, his wife, his child, and the home he had once prized, hit him like a sledgehammer. In a panic, he called Alicia, only to find her phone was switched off. He left voicemails, texting frantically that he needed time to fix things. But Alicia offered no solace. She was already planning her next move, furious that Richard's finances might soon be tied up in a messy divorce. Alone in the echoing quiet of the once happy house, Richard realized the full extent of what he had done. He stared at the walls, each framed photograph, a haunting reminder of the life he had willingly destroyed. The following week unfolded in a series of tense negotiations and strategic moves on both sides. Emily, guided by her father's legal expertise, filed for divorce under the grounds of irreconcilable differences, backed by the evidence of adultery, and requested immediate possession of the marital residence. The house had been purchased during the marriage, making it a marital asset subject to division. But Emily's father was confident they could argue her need to remain in the home, particularly given her pregnancy and emotional distress. In Illinois law and in many states, courts often consider the child's best interests when deciding who should retain possession of the marital home. As Emily was carrying the unborn child, Robert planned to argue that uprooting her during this vulnerable time would be detrimental to both mother and baby. Richard's lawyers countered. They demanded mediation, claiming that Richard had provided the bulk of the finances for purchasing and maintaining the property. But behind the courtroom bravado, even they recognized the uphill battle they faced. The evidence of his affair was overwhelming. Text messages, emails, hotel receipts, all meticulously compiled by Emily and her father. It painted Richard as reckless and morally culpable, desperate not to lose his home or his reputation. Richard tried to negotiate private settlements. He called Emily incessantly, offering more than generous financial support for the baby in exchange for dropping the demand for sole possession of the house. He played on her emotions, reminding her of their early days together, the love that had once bound them. But Emily was no longer swayed by tears or sweet promises. Her father's unwavering resolve, coupled with the stark reality of Richard's betrayal, fortified her decision. Meanwhile, Alicia Morgan entered the fray uninvited. She approached local tabloids claiming to have inside information about a famous Chicago millionaire entangled in a salacious scandal. She teased them with partial screenshots of incriminating texts. Her aim was not only to get paid for her story, but also to pressure Richard into meeting her financial demands. She suspected that if the media latched on to the scandal, Richard might pay her a handsome sum to keep quiet. After all, he was already at risk of losing his marriage and his company's reputation. When Richard's legal team caught wind of Alicia's antics, they realized they were dealing with a ticking time bomb. Any hint of Alicia's blackmail could further tilt the scales in Emily's favor. If the court perceived that Richard's indiscretions went beyond a mere affair and into the territory of fraud and hush money, the judgment could be devastating for him. Richard was thrust into a nightmare of his own making to silence Alicia. He would have to pay exorbitant sums that he would later need to fight for in property division. To fight Alicia in court would mean more public exposure. Either way, his finances and reputation were in peril. One fateful afternoon, Emily's pregnancy complications landed her in the hospital for observation. The stress of the divorce and the emotional turmoil had taken a toll on her health. When Richard rushed to the hospital, a mix of guilt and fear flooding his mind, Robert barred him from Emily's room. A short, heated confrontation ensued in the waiting area, with Robert threatening a restraining order if Richard refused to respect Emily's emotional well-being. Through the glass pane, Richard saw Emily lying on the hospital bed, eyes closed, an IV in her arm, her face pale. It was a painful reminder that while he was losing everything, it was primarily his unborn child's mother who needed protecting from his actions. He left the hospital that day, haunted by the realization that no matter the outcome of the divorce, he might forever be estranged from the family he once hoped to create. At the Davis Fund, the board members began to question Richard's fitness to lead. The rumors swirling around his personal life were affecting investor confidence. Share prices dipped, and an emergency meeting was scheduled to decide the company's future. Richard was given an ultimatum: resolve his personal issues swiftly or risk stepping down from his role as CEO to preserve the firm's integrity. In a matter of weeks, Richard had gone from being a rising titan of finance to a man on the brink of losing everything: his wife, his child, his reputation, and possibly the home he had poured so much into. The scenario grew bleaker with each passing day, like quicksand dragging him deeper into a pit he had dug himself. Yet the most devastating blow was still to come. Court rulings can be a swift hammer, and Emily's father was determined to use every legal advantage to ensure his daughter received that hammer's full protection. The day of the first hearing arrived under an overcast sky, a fitting reflection of the grim faces entering the courthouse. Emily, visibly pregnant, walked in alongside her father, Robert Thompson, and her legal team. Richard arrived separately, with his own lawyers looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers and reporters who had caught wind of a high-profile divorce battle. The judge, a stern woman with decades of family law experience, wasted no time calling the proceedings to order. First on the docket, a request for temporary possession of the marital home and a restraining order that would limit Richard's contact with Emily unless it pertained directly to her medical well-being or the unborn child's needs. Robert presented the evidence of Richard's affair, complete with text messages, hotel receipts, and suspicious transactions. He emphasized the psychological harm that Emily had endured during her pregnancy, portraying Richard as a man who callously moved his mistress into their marital home. Richard's lawyers tried to counter. They argued that while the affair was regrettable, it did not rise to the level of needing a restraining order or forcing him out of the house he had paid for. They cast doubt on whether Alicia's move-in was merely a misunderstanding. Emily's team swiftly rebutted, painting a vivid picture of Alicia's presence in the house, including the shocking scene in the kitchen. The judge studied the documents and listened to the testimonies, her gaze flicking over to Emily, who quietly dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Then she turned to Richard, who sat stiffly avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. After a brief recess, she returned with her decision. Given the evidence presented, she began, and the concern for Mrs. Davis's emotional health during pregnancy, I'm granting temporary exclusive possession of the marital home to Mrs. Davis. Mr. Davis, you will vacate the property immediately. Additionally, any contact between you and Mrs. Davis should be mediated by legal counsel or arranged with respect to Mrs. Davis's ongoing medical appointments for the pregnancy. This includes phone text or in-person contact. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Richard's jaw tightened. Emily's father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The judge rapped her gavel to silence the buzz. The temporary ruling felt like a moral victory for Emily, a tangible acknowledgement of her suffering. Richard, on the other hand, looked shell-shocked. It was the first major blow in what promised to be a grueling legal ordeal. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Emily's father ushered her into a waiting car, shielding her from cameras. Richard, however, found himself bombarded with questions about his affair, his company, and the mistress rumored to be blackmailing him. Back at the Davis Fund's office, the news spread like wildfire. Investors called in droves, demanding explanations. With mounting pressure, the board convened yet another urgent meeting. Richard walked in, shoulders slumped, hair disheveled, wearing the same suit he'd worn to court. The board chairman didn't mince words either. Richard took a leave of absence or faced a formal vote to remove him, unwilling to publicly lose control of the company he had built. Richard grudgingly agreed to step back from day-to-day operations. He issued a statement blaming personal matters for his temporary withdrawal and installed his trusted CFO as acting CEO. In the days that followed, Richard bounced between high-priced hotels and short-term rentals, trying to figure out his next move. He cut off most contact with Alicia to avoid further scandal, though she still sent him threatening messages. Without the refuge of his home or the stability of his CEO position, he felt like a phantom drifting through a life that was rapidly unraveling. Meanwhile, Emily settled into the house, supported by her father, friends, and extended family, who visited regularly to check on her and the baby. The legal battle, far from over, continued behind the scenes. Richard's lawyers pushed for a financial settlement that would allow him to regain access to the home, or at the very least keep some semblance of his fortune. Emily's team held firm, demanding substantial child support, alimony, and strict conditions that would protect her from any further harassment. During this tense interim, Emily gave birth to a beautiful baby girl whom she named Lily. The birth brought her immeasurable joy, yet a cloud still loomed. She asked her father not to bar Richard from meeting his newborn daughter. For all his faults, she believed Lily deserved to know her father. So under controlled circumstances, arranged by their lawyers, Richard was allowed a brief, supervised visit at the hospital. He held Lily for the first time, tears brimming in his eyes, as the gravity of his actions sank deeper. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Emily, voice breaking. She said nothing, her silence more damning than any angry words could have been. In that fleeting moment, he understood that while he might play a role in Lily's life, he had already lost Emily in every meaningful sense. With Richard estranged from his home and company, Alicia, Morgan sensed an opportunity to capitalize on his vulnerabilities. She had waited patiently, collecting every shred of evidence that linked her to him. Pictures, text exchanges, even voice recordings of their conversations. Initially, her goal was to intimidate him into paying her hush money. But as the headlines grew more salacious, Alicia contemplated a different angle, selling her story to the highest bidder. Approaching a well-known tabloid, she teased the existence of incriminating details and sappy messages Richard had sent her, detailing how he was torn between his pregnant wife and his lover. The tabloid editor, eager for a scoop, arranged an exclusive interview. Alicia arrived in a sleek, form-fitting dress, exuding confidence. She portrayed herself as the victim of Richard's manipulation, insisting that he had promised her a stable life and marriage, a claim far from the truth. She spun a narrative that was half truth, half fabrication. Richard allegedly pursued her, convincing her to move in because he felt neglected by his wife. She painted Emily as a demanding socialite who pushed Richard away with her own ambitions. According to Alicia, she was simply the woman who provided emotional support when Emily couldn't. When the interview hit the tabloids, the public reaction was swift and fierce. The piece portrayed Alicia as a cunning opportunist in some corners and a misunderstood damsel. In others, social media erupted with debates over the morality of her actions, with many condemning Richard for his betrayal, but equally disgusted by Alicia's brazen attempt to profit from the scandal. The Davis Fund's reputation, already on shaky ground, took another hit. Investors began questioning whether the firm could survive its founder's public disgrace. Meanwhile, Alicia was called to testify in a deposition related to the divorce proceedings. Emily's father, Robert, wasted no time subpoenaing her. In a closed-door session, Alicia was forced to answer pointed questions about her relationship with Richard, the timing of her move into the Davis home, and any financial arrangements between them. As the deposition wore on, Alicia's stories started contradicting each other. Under intense questioning from Robert, she admitted that Richard never explicitly promised to marry her. She also revealed that many of the text messages had been exaggerated or taken out of context for the tabloids. Her credibility crumbled the moment she realized she'd cornered herself with her own lies. Her demeanor shifted from cocky confidence to fear. She tried to recant, to amend her statements, but the damage was done. This deposition proved a valuable weapon in Emily's case. Not only did it further tarnish Richard's defense that Alicia was just a friend in need, but it showed the court that Alicia's presence in the marital home was undeniably orchestrated by Richard, thus supporting Emily's claims of severe emotional distress. The final nail in the coffin was Alicia's admission that she had indeed received money from Richard to stay silent, and that she had threatened to go public if he didn't comply. This revelation torpedoed any vestige of sympathy the judge might have had for Richard's predicament. The courts now saw him as a man willing to leverage marital funds to hide an affair, thus breaching financial and ethical obligations to his wife. Realizing she had lost any chance of a lucrative settlement from Richard, Alicia turned desperate. She started calling him relentlessly, leaving voicemails at odd hours, apologizing, begging for them to reconcile. But by then, Richard had no patience left for her manipulations. He blocked her number, effectively ending their relationship. In the end, Alicia's true colors emerged for everyone to see: a woman driven by greed and drama, unafraid to burn bridges for a shot at wealth or fame. She faded from the public spotlight, a brief but explosive figure in a scandal that continued to echo through the halls of Chicago's legal system and society pages. Richard, for his part, received no reprieve from the relentless forward march of the divorce proceedings. Each new revelation, each new scandal only dug him deeper into a legal pit that now seemed insurmountable. As Richard's position worsened, one unexpected ally emerged: Michael Anders, a colleague from his early career days, who had known him before his rise to wealth. Michael was a fellow investor who had witnessed Richard's ambition firsthand and remembered the idealistic young man who truly wanted to make something of his life. When news of Richard's scandal broke, Michael was disappointed, but also worried about his old friend's well-being. He reached out discreetly, inviting Richard to a quiet dinner at a low-profile restaurant, haggard from stress and desperate for any friendly face. Richard agreed. Over plates of simple pasta, Michael cut straight to the point. "You've made a colossal mess of things." "Richard," he said, voice low but firm, "but I want to help you salvage what's left, if not for yourself, then for your daughter." Exhausted, Richard rubbed his temples. "I don't think there's anything left to salvage," he replied, a hint of despair coloring his words. "I've lost my wife, my company, and probably my reputation. All because I couldn't keep my priorities straight." Michael shook his head. "I won't defend what you did, but you're still Lily's father. There's life after scandal. Richard, it may not be the life you imagined, but there's a path forward." Michael offered a plan. He knew some investors who might be willing to keep the Davis Fund afloat if Richard formally resigned and sold his shares at a reasonable price. This would allow the firm to continue operating without the baggage of Richard's personal scandal. In turn, the buyout could give Richard the financial means to meet whatever settlement the court imposed and still have something left to start anew. Richard hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. The Davis Fund was his the crowning achievement that pulled him out of poverty to rendering it, felt like signing away his identity. But deep down he knew it was the only real option left that could prevent a total financial meltdown. If he fought to stay, the board would remove him. The company's reputation might not recover, and lawsuits could drag on indefinitely. Michael also urged Richard to seek therapy. "You need to understand why you destroyed what you had," he said. "Otherwise, you'll keep repeating the same mistakes." That night, Richard pondered Michael's words in a cramped hotel room overlooking a busy highway, amid the roar of passing cars. He felt a faint glimmer of hope. Maybe if he took responsibility for his actions, he could find some measure of redemption. The next morning, he contacted Michael to say he would accept the proposed deal. Within days, he was in talks with potential buyers for the Davis Fund. Surprisingly, another unexpected ally emerged: Emily's college friend, Sarah Weston, who had known both Emily and Richard as a couple. She reached out to Richard with a cautious olive branch. Sarah explained that while she despised what he did to Emily, she also believed that for Lily's sake, it would be best if he and Emily found a way to co-parent civilly. "She's still hurt and angry," Sarah said. "But once the legal dust settles, Lily deserves two parents who can manage a cordial relationship. Prove to Emily that you can be responsible and consistent, and maybe she'll see you as more than just the man who betrayed her." Richard valued Sarah's perspective. It was the first time someone close to Emily had acknowledged his role as Lily's father without outright condemning him to oblivion. He resolved to do whatever necessary to maintain a relationship with his daughter, even if Emily refused to forgive him. These surprising allies, Michael and Sarah, unintentionally worked in tandem, guiding Richard toward a path of acceptance and accountability. They couldn't undo his mistakes, but they showed him there was a way to face the consequences without losing every last shred of humanity. It wasn't a redemption arc yet, but it was the first step in a journey that might eventually lead to something resembling peace. As the divorce proceedings neared their conclusion, karma struck with a swiftness that felt almost biblical. All the lies, deceit, and reckless decisions that had fueled Richard's secret life came crashing down in a final devastating blow. In a landmark ruling, the judge awarded Emily primary physical custody of Lily, along with substantial monthly child support. She also granted Emily exclusive ownership of the marital home, citing Richard's misappropriation of marital funds and the emotional trauma he had inflicted upon Emily during pregnancy. While Richard's legal team attempted a last-minute maneuver to reduce alimony and keep partial ownership of the house, the judge was unswayed. The court finds Mr. Davis's actions egregious. She pronounced, banging her gavel, "This is not a mere lapse in judgment, but a series of deliberate choices that harmed his wife and unborn child." Accordingly, Mrs. Davis will retain the property rights to the marital home. Mr. Davis will comply with all financial obligations as determined by this court. The audience in the courtroom was hushed. A sense of finality hung in the air. Emily, tears in her eyes, clasped her father's hand. Richard stood there, numb, as if the walls were closing in and the floor was disappearing beneath him. His empire, his family, the house he had painstakingly built, gone. The only silver lining was that he retained visitation rights to Lily, though under strict conditions. In the aftermath of the ruling, Alicia Morgan attempted one last gambit to extort money from Richard. She threatened to leak more damaging information to the press. But by then, the world had moved on to fresher scandals. Her once headline-grabbing story fizzled out, leaving her with no leverage. In a final act of desperation, she tried to contact Emily, claiming she had vital information to share about Richard. Emily ignored her pleas. Alicia's presence had already done enough damage, and she would not be given the chance to inflict more pain. Shortly after the court's decision, the Davis Fund completed its buyout. Richard signed the final documents, officially relinquishing control of the company he had founded. The payout, while significant, was nowhere near the fortune he once possessed. A large portion went to legal fees, alimony, and child support obligations. What remained was enough to let him start anew in a modest fashion, an outcome both humiliating and strangely liberating. In the days that followed, headlines like "Millionaire loses house to pregnant wife in court" battle-blanketed social media, fueling countless discussions on infidelity, greed, and the perils of mixing business and pleasure. Some commentators framed Emily's victory as a feminist triumph. Others saw it as a morality tale about a man undone by his own hubris. For Richard, the realization of his downfall was a tormenting experience. He found himself renting a small apartment in a less upscale neighborhood, its bare walls a stark contrast to the sumptuous home he once owned. Each night he lay awake on an inexpensive mattress, haunted by memories of the life he had forfeited. Gone were the tailored suits, the brand-new luxury cars, and the adoring gaze of high society. In their place was a quiet solitude, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic. This was karma in its rawest form. He had taken for granted the love of a devoted wife, the sanctity of a stable home, and the promise of fatherhood. In chasing a momentary thrill, he'd trampled on what truly mattered. Now fate handed him the bill for his transgressions, and it was one he had no choice but to pay. In the wake of the divorce, both Richard and Emily grappled with the emotional and psychological aftershocks. For Emily, the ordeal had been devastating, but it also reinforced her sense of self-worth and resilience. She recognized that she had allowed love to blind her to the warning signs for too long. Never again would she compromise her dignity for someone who showed so little respect for their vows. With Robert's guidance, she set up a trust for Lily, using part of the settlement. Money ensuring her daughter would have financial security for education and future endeavors. She also immersed herself in motherhood, finding joy in each tiny milestone from Lily's first smile to her first wobbly steps. There were lonely nights when she missed the companionship she once shared with Richard, but she reminded herself that the man who betrayed her was not the husband she fell in love with, and that heartbreak could be a catalyst for growth if she allowed it. Richard's journey was far more tumultuous. After losing his company, his home, and much of his fortune, he drifted aimlessly plagued by guilt. Buoyed by Michael Anders's suggestion, he started attending therapy sessions. In the sterile comfort of a psychologist's office, Richard dissected his choices, tracing them back to insecurities he never admitted to himself. Through the grueling process of introspection, he learned how his insatiable need for validation and thrill-seeking had led him to sabotage the very things he valued most. Slowly, he began to rebuild. His buyout money allowed him to invest in small-scale projects, nothing as grand as the Davis Fund, but enough to keep him afloat. He reached out to philanthropic organizations, volunteering his time in an attempt to atone for his past arrogance. It wasn't an easy road. There were days he wanted to wallow in self-pity, to rage against a world he felt had judged him too harshly. But he remembered holding Lily for the first time, seeing her tiny hand curl around his finger. That memory kept him from sinking deeper into despair. Every other weekend, Richard was granted visitation with Lily, strictly monitored by mutual agreement. At first, Emily was uneasy about letting him near their daughter, but as time passed, and as Richard demonstrated a commitment to change, she relaxed her stance. In those short visits, Richard discovered a love deeper and more pure than anything he had felt before. Lily gurgled and cooed blissfully, unaware of the drama that had shaped her parents' lives. In her innocent eyes, Richard found a fragile redemption. Emily, too, softened ever so slightly, acknowledging that while she might never forgive Richard fully for the betrayal, he was Lily's father, and Lily deserved the chance to know him. She witnessed him cradling their daughter with trembling arms, tears of gratitude in his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, she glimpsed the man he used to be. Neither Emily nor Richard would ever forget the pain of those turbulent years. Their paths had diverged, shaped by heartbreak and consequence, yet in their separate journeys, each found a renewed sense of purpose. Emily discovered her inner strength and the unwavering support of her family. Richard discovered humility and a longing to be a better man for his child. In the silence of their respective nights, they often reflected on the fragility of trust and the dire costs of deception. Their story became a cautionary tale within their social circles, a reminder that betrayal can destroy even the most lavish foundations, and that when it comes to family, the stakes are far too high for reckless temptations. Time has a way of smoothing the jagged edges of trauma, if not erasing them entirely. As the months turned into years, Emily and Richard settled into a cautious but workable co-parenting arrangement. Emily remained in the house, its rooms echoing with Lily's laughter and the bustling warmth of friends and family. She occasionally entertained suitors, though she chose to move slowly, ever vigilant about protecting her heart, and her daughter Richard, for his part, maintained a modest life. The once self-assured millionaire who commanded boardrooms was replaced by a man who understood the precariousness of success. He worked diligently on small ventures, forging new partnerships that valued transparency over ruthless ambition. Though he was far from the wealth and status he once enjoyed, there was a quiet sense of fulfillment in building a life on honesty rather than deception. He saw Lily regularly watching with awe as she grew from a toddler into a spirited young girl. They went on simple outings to the park, read bedtime stories in his small living room, and on special occasions he treated her to a day at the zoo or the children's museum. Each visit reminded him of the precious gift he had almost lost forever. Rumors of his scandal died down, replaced by fresh gossip and news cycles. Alicia Morgan all but vanished from public view. Some said she moved out of state, chasing yet another wealthy mark. Others claimed she had tried a reality TV stint that never took off. Whatever the truth, her chapter in Richard's life was firmly closed. Over time, the house that Emily won in court underwent renovations, transforming from a place tainted by betrayal into a sanctuary of renewal. She repainted the walls in bright colors, added a garden that Lily loved to play in, and hosted holiday gatherings for loved ones. The negative memories, while not forgotten, grew distant beneath layers of new, positive experiences. For both Emily and Richard, the lesson was indelible. Love, trust, and integrity cannot be bought or faked. They come with accountability. And when one is tempted to compromise those values, the fall from grace is swift and unforgiving. While their marriage would never be rekindled, they shared a bond far more sacred than vows their daughter, whose laughter was a testament that life could go on even after the storm. Every story has its lessons, and this real-life drama serves as a potent reminder of what's truly at stake when vows are broken and secrets creep into a marriage. Richard and Emily's tale is one of wealth, lost trust shattered, and love stretched to its limit, but also of new beginnings and hard-won insights. Karma has a way of collecting its debts, and when it finally does, the price is steep. Yet amid the fallout, there is always a chance for growth, for redemption, and for creating a better path forward, especially when there's an innocent child at the center of it all. If you found this story gripping and full of life lessons, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. Your engagement helps us bring you more captivating real-life dramas, each with its own twists, turns, and moral wake-up calls. Thank you for watching.